have trouble for country roads and vanishing signs of the times. On this pig farm in Sweden, as on every other farm in this country, it's against the law to feed the animals with antibiotics in order to make them grow faster. Whereas in Britain and in many other countries, those same antibiotics are part of the everyday diet of farm animals. So, who's right? Is there a danger in feeding these drugs to food animals, or is it good farming practice and perfectly safe?
Here in Sweden, we believe that antibiotic, as our most valuable drug, has to be used properly to cure and prevent diseases and not be misused to make the animals grow better.
It would be disastrous if growth promoters were to be banned, not just for livestock producers, for consumers, for everybody.
I think that it's a potential problem, that we should tackle it now and prevent it from becoming a real problem and a big problem.
Young animals on most British farms get low levels of antibiotics mixed into their feed to make their digestive systems more efficient, which means they produce more meat in less time, so it's cheaper. These growth promoters are used in addition to the antibiotics, which are given for specific health reasons. But a few days ago, Europe banned the use of one of them, avoparcin, which has been on the market for more than 20 years.
Avoparcin has been banned because it is related to another antibiotic which is used in man, a very important antibiotic called vancomycin. And using avoparcin in animals as a growth promoter may lead to the emergence of bacteria which are resistant to vancomycin. And that would be a serious problem, because vancomycin is our last defense mechanism against some highly resistant bacteria.
For many years, farmers have not been allowed to feed their animals with antibiotic drugs that are also used in human medicine. Avoparcin, which is used mainly in the poultry industry, is the first growth promoter to be banned because of a potential risk to consumer health. While chicken farmers still assess the likely impact, critics of the ban say it's being imposed by the European Commission against the advice of its independent scientists and without any firm evidence.
All antibiotic growth promoters are on free sale, that is without prescription, which is a good indication that the powers that be believe these products to be safe. Very surprising then that we find that avoparcin is banned as of April the 1st.
But isn't that because of concerns over human health?
Well, that's surprising really, when we think that in only December the scientific committee appointed by the EU ministers found that there was no case against avoparcin. Perhaps it's political expediency we're talking about, not a true medical risk.
Keeping down the cost, that's the great argument in favour of antibiotic growth promoters. Avoparcin has been very successful at its job. But because consumers now demand to know more about what goes into their food, producers are worried that a mood might be created which leads to other growth promoters being banned. But what's the scientific link between farm animals and meat eaters?
If bacteria, which are present in the farm animals, get experience of the antibiotic, particularly at a low level, they can become resistant to it. Resistance emerges. It is difficult, but resistance emerges. Now, these bacteria, which are in the farm animals, are or may then be passed on to man in the food chain. We are what we eat, and we eat bacteria. As well as the meat, we eat the bacteria on the meat. We then become colonized with them, or they cause an infection in us, and they're already resistant to the antibiotics we would like to use, then we're at a disadvantage.
The possibility of the transfer of resistance to human pathogens is extremely remote. The growth promoters are doing a very useful job where they're used in keeping animals healthy.
But if they are banned, a potential risk to human health would be eliminated, wouldn't it?
No, not entirely. The growth promoters that we use are registered because they have no perceived risk to human health, and what would happen is that we would end up with more disease in animals, and that itself represents serious risk to human health.
Here in Sweden, pigs and all other livestock have been raised entirely without the use of any antibiotic growth promoters since 1986. has meant big changes for the farming industry. And since Sweden joined the EU, it's found itself out of step with the rest of Europe over the ban. At first, thousands of animals in intensive systems died when antibiotics were removed from their feed. Now they're kept in small batches so their health can be monitored, a problematical switchover.
It was in the start when we had big problems, that is for true, but today the farmers have overcome this, and today they can have a high efficiency and somewhat higher cost, that is true. We haven't banned antibiotics, but we use them when we need them. The key thing is we try to prevent diseases by good management and hygiene, and not by the use of antibiotics.
Despite all that, food produced in Sweden is now considerably more expensive. And because the ban is against EU regulations, the Swedes have been given until next year to come up with good scientific reasons to justify it.
What we know is that the farmer, they don't want to go back because they believe and they can produce in this way. And we are now also part of a union, so we have to make our voice heard.
In the UK, the use of antibiotic growth promoters in feed has become a routine element of animal husbandry. And for the pharmaceutical industry, it's a business worth around £13 million a year. David Barker is a typical middle-sized pig breeder. He has 1,200 of them on his farm in Suffolk and gives them antibiotic growth promoters already mixed into their feed. Though he's concerned for the welfare of both consumers and animals, he believes the Swedes have gone too far.
Yes, I think they have, because I really believe that the growth promoters aren't that great a problem, and inevitably, if we remove them, I think it will be higher cost of production and, of course, more expensive pig meat.
And are you happy with the concept of using antibiotics as growth promoters?
Well, I think as farmers, we are in the hands of the scientists. We have to have faith in what is formulated for us, and really, that's the only way we can positively go. We've got to look to science rather than emotion on this subject.
After the salutary lesson over the animal feed that led to the BSE disaster, everyone is more conscious of what's fed to the food we eat. So should we worry about these growth promoters?
I think you have to keep everything in proportion. I don't think people should be worried about the food they eat anyway. I think that's one of my friends said eating has always been a high-risk business. So I don't think people should go around worrying about it. But I think that those of us whose concern is food safety should look at it and tackle the problem now before it becomes a serious one.
With some scientists questioning the indiscriminate use of antibiotics as growth promoters, and with Sweden determined to fight its corner in Europe, this is an issue which is now firmly on the international food health agenda.
The government says it will announce its plans for a certified herd scheme soon. It's one of the measures, along with the selective cull, which needs to be implemented before the ban on British beef exports is lifted. But farmers aren't convinced that it's necessary.
I'm concerned that something like the certified herd scheme may in fact appear that something is better about one farm than the other. British beef is safe.
We'll be looking at the implications on the selective slaughter scheme in next week's Countryfile.
Environmentalists say that some seabird colonies are continuing to decline dramatically a year after the Sea Empress oil spill off the Welsh coast. They say there may be longer-term impacts on fish-eating birds. Conservationists plan to renew their demands for a public inquiry on the anniversary of the spill this Friday.
Conservationists hope a test case can be used to fight government plans to build millions of new homes in the countryside. The Council for the Protection of Rural England will launch a new challenge to government policy on Tuesday. The organisation will try to ensure that planners reduce building levels in recognition of environmental constraints.
One of the largest supermarket chains has promised to label all its products that contain genetically modified soya. Tesco announced its decision on Thursday and says it's happy to continue stocking items when they've been judged safe by the relevant government organisations. Meanwhile, an application's been submitted to hold field trials on genetically modified sugar beet in Shropshire.
The joys of the countryside, peace and quiet, fresh air, nice scenery, and a main road through a quiet village, full of these, 38 tons of it. And soon it could be 44 tonnes, even heavier. 6 axles, air suspension, but it's supposed to be quiet and more fuel efficient. State of the art. All right, Pete? Out for a test drive, the 6 axles spread the weight, reducing wear and tear on the roads, doing less damage than the present 38 tonners with 5 sets of wheels. And bigger loads mean fewer lorries, so claims the government, whose consultation on 44 tonners ends this week. Pete Collins believes this is good news. He's been trucking around the world for 42 years, now back home making deliveries around Gloucestershire's country lanes.
It will make no difference to the size. It will make no difference to the way we act. We take consideration of people, cars, ladies, old ladies, people with prams. We're watching for them all the time. We do understand their fears. The weight should not make any difference to their rural life.
40-tonne trucks are a definite. Europe's demanding it. But down at the local pub in Rangeworthy, villagers are not entirely happy about the government's proposals for 44-tonners, even though they're no bigger.
Well, that may be so, but they're still too big. Whatever you say.
Their emissions might be slightly less, but their threat is going to be increased.
Yes, and you're intimidated by them.
Problems with the lorries of the current size. It's getting more dangerous walking along the road. Mothers with their children going down to school have to stand back every time a lorry passes.
Quieter, smoother, healthier or not, Pete and his 44-tonner are not popular here.
There were only trains to carry stuff going back before the war and before the First World War. Well, why can't they go back to that instead of having all these wretched lorries?
5 freight trains depart from this terminal here in Manchester daily. This is the 1210 bound for France and Italy. It will take 16 hours to get to France, 34 hours to get to Italy. But the company says it could more than double the amount of freight being taken on the existing services, if only it could be got off the roads. Enter the Americans, Wisconsin Central, the owners of the privatised freight company, English, Welsh and Scottish Railways. In just a year, they're transporting milk and timber around Britain again, business long lost to the roads. But if lorries are able to carry more, then transporting all these goods by road will become cheaper.
Rail prices are set by road, that's our competition, so it means we have to reduce our prices by 20% in order to keep business on the rails. It's going to make marginal business impossible to carry at a viable rate, and we've identified about 20% of our traffic which is vulnerable.
Quarrying is the heavy industry of the countryside. RMC invested millions in a railhead in this Derbyshire quarry in the 80s. Carrying large loads, long distances, companies like RMC are not about to change from rail to road.
Industry is not going to choose road or rail just because of whether or not 44 tonnes is there. Industry is going to choose rail because rail is offering a good service to industry. And that's where rail really need to direct their action, not at trying to limit the vast majority of road operations, which can never go by rail.
Farming and minerals, the reasons the railways were built, and a long-term target once more of the new rail company. But these shorter haul journeys mean more rail pickup points, and that means spending more money. This is clearly the case here in Yorkshire, in Horton, in Ribblesdale, home of the Three Peaks. About 1,000 people live here. The main employer lies just above the village, and it's one of Tarmac's more remote quarries. And it transports everything out of here by road, despite the fact that a railway runs right through the village and right past the quarry. 60 to 100 trucks rumble through Horton every day. Strengthening bridges for heavier lorries by 1999 is now a government priority. Coal comfort for the villagers.
Well, I mean, we have narrow roads. We have a narrow bridge over here with a very sharp right-hand bend there, a couple of bridges, and heavy quarry lorries coming out of the quarry up the road here.
Why can't they use the railways up here? You're very close to the second parallel line.
Indeed, absolutely. The reason, quite simply, is the commercial one from the quarry company's point of view.
The husband and son of this sheep farmer drive lorries for the quarry.
Most of our income comes from the lorry side of the business. It helps to prop up the farming. We've had talks with the quarry owners about the possibility of a lot of stuff going down on the railways. But of course it's where the railheads are, and the fact that somewhere along the line the lorries are going to have to meet up with the trains. Somebody is going to have to be disturbed, but, you know, obviously we don't want any more heavier lorries on, you know, to impact on our village life.
Most of Tarmac's business in the northwest is within 50 miles of their quarries. Even with a railway on the doorstep, it's inconvenient for delivering the stone. So cleaner, cheaper 44-ton lorries will win every time.
We are as a company, very sensitive about our environment in which we live. I see these particular vehicles here as being very much an improvement on what we've ever had before.
What would it take to get you to put your aggregate on the railways?
Because the value of the actual product is sometimes less than the actual haulage cost itself, we need some other way of getting the haulage costs on rail down. If there was more incentive for us to get the product back on the rail from an economic and efficiency point of view, we would do it, I'm sure.
So no rail, but the prospect of heavier, though cleaner and quieter lorries for Horton. So is there really a problem? The government itself admits there may be.
Clearly we do have to weigh in the balance the possibility that the general use of 44-ton vehicles would attract traffic away from rail. Of course, we do make available track access grant and freight facilities grant where there are good environmental benefits from securing new freight from road to rail. And amongst other things, the track access grant does reduce the track access charges to make rail more competitive with road. So we already have those mechanisms in place.
Back in Rangeworthy, Pete's 44-tonner could be the future. But if the number of lorries on country roads is to fall, as the government claims, it'll need higher road taxes, restrictions to rural roads, and more grants for rail transport.
This week's roundup begins with bad news for conservationists. Spotlight in the southwest reported on alarming numbers of dead dolphins being washed up on beaches.
The Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food has now accepted that the majority of deaths are caused by fishing practices.
We see all along the beach all the time lumps of fish net of different sorts. And this, of course, is a man-made fibre. It doesn't rot away, and not only does it catch the fish, but we find it in birds' nests, on the seabirds' nests, and it gets around their bodies, and there's no getting rid of it.
It's quite distressing coming across something like this, but there have been 31 washed up on beaches in Devon and Cornwall in January alone, showing the scale of the problem.
What I can't understand is why the government bodies and the MAF and the EC haven't provided massive funding for what is really a very important issue. I really truly feel that how many more dolphins have got to die before we really address this problem?
Newsline reported on how the fight to save rare orchids at a nature reserve in Northern Ireland has found an unusual ally.
Survival of the fittest rules here. Everything's been tried to keep the dreaded weed at bay. Lawnmowers, strimmers and even sheep. But to no avail. Until now, that is.
The goats are an ideal opportunity to get an animal on there that will eat anything when the orchids aren't there and won't fall down the slope, and they'll preferentially take the plants that we don't actually want, which would be the gorse and the bracken and the brambles.
Do you think that they're doing the job properly? I mean, is there a danger that they'll eat the orchids themselves?
Well, we'll take the goats off before the orchids start to grow up through the ground, and hopefully they won't disturb them at all.
The goats were provided by a local farmer, but even he's the first to admit his reasons are purely practical.
It's a blessing in disguise for me, because I had to feed these goats, I had to give them hay and meal, and it's saving me, and they're living here naturally just without it.
I shouldn't be allowed out, go for a walk, and 10 minutes later I'm lost. And it's no joke on a winter's day when it's cold and the light's failing. Salvation, a signpost. East Grinstead? Am I in Sussex? Hang on a second. Belper 4 3/4? Belper's in Derbyshire. What's going on? Where am I? This is an impossible place. Watch out, there's a signpost collector about. By night, Stuart Hands repairs waymarkers, county signs or the fingers of signposts. Retired food science lecturer, Stuart has had the bug for 15 years. Signposts vary depending on the county or age. Stuart wants them all, wood, stone, cross or pointer. And by day, Stuart goes in search of the perfect specimen to add to his collection.
Well, what you have here is a traditional Devon finger post.
Why has he got so many arms?
Well, it was a favourite idea, I think, of the surveyor from the South Hams. I think he ran a competition with himself to see how many arms he could put on the post.
Well, he certainly hasn't left any villages off on this one, has he?
Well, I think this was his pièce de résistance, if I can use the word. You see some with 5 or even 6, but 9 is exceptional, and I think it's a wonderful piece of English idiosyncratic nature. Is that the word? I don't know, but you know, something different, and I think it's brilliant. There you are now, that's a lovely signpost. Is it cast iron? Well, I reckon it's about 1930, something like that. Cumberland County Council, they kept most of their signposts. Lovely sign. Don't you agree?
Mm. The official history of signposts begins in 1773. The General Turnpike Act, the first time by law that main road junctions had to have signs showing the way to the nearest market town. Not a lot of people are interested in signposts, so what is it that turns you on about them?
I think that's part of it. Nobody else is interested in them. And yet they're sort of an everyday part of everyday life. They are functional, but at the same time they're artistic. I think so. I think they're part of the highway heritage of England, and to see them disappear without record, I think it's a great pity.
The Road Traffic Act now says old signs must be replaced.
Now here's one that would interest you, Rupert.
That's fantastic, Stuart. How old's that?
It's a standard Devon County Council sign, produced anything between 1930 and 1955, I would say.
So it's a real original?
Oh yes, it's one of the original standard signposts.
Right, on to the next one.
Fine, let's go.
Stuart rarely drives past a good old-fashioned signpost without stopping. In fact, after a dozen or so stops, Stuart's obsession can become ever so slightly wearing.
Come on, Rupert.
I suppose it's another signpost,
is it? You want to see these things, come on.
Yes, right.
Look, now here we have, isn't that lovely?
Yes, I suppose so.
Well, what you've got here is a standard Somerset finger post, and it hadn't been for the surveyor in the 1960s, these all been scrapped.
Now, you may have noticed Stuart's wife behaving rather oddly.
3, 4, 5, 6 arms.
Marjorie, why are you wearing a blanket?
Well, it gets a little embarrassing when we stop by the roadside and look at these signs, especially when he starts getting out pots of paint and restoring them. You know, curious motorists drive past and I try to pretend that I'm not really with him at times.
Are you actually that interested in signposts?
Well, you can build up your interest and, yes, the novelty does wear off after a time, but you have to encourage these eccentrics, don't you?
Stuart doesn't need any encouragement. His house was filling up until the Dingles Museum near Oakhampton kindly took the lot. But how did he get all these signs in the first place?
All of them are being got quite legit from county surveyors. They're only too happy to give them, if, of course, they're going to scrap them. And my view is the right place is them on the highway, but if they're going to be scrapped, well, let's at least preserve them.
His latest acquisition for the county plate collection. If only he could get one for Lancashire, he'd have the set. Meanwhile, back on the road again.
Well, look at that then. What a specimen. I reckon this is, yep, I reckon this is least pre-World War, and it may even be Victorian because of the height of it. What was happening is as the stagecoach came in, they could look at it without having to get off the top of the box. It's a really Rupert, I'm telling you about this post look. It's got these arms on, which have got letters which are just non-standard letters. Yeah, that's a really rare survival, that. Then you find these in the out-of-the-way places like up here.
Hello again. We're in for a week of fairly windy weather, and it's going to be pretty changeable too. Let's take a look at the wind arrows, because there will be times when the winds ease, and that could well lead to a touch of frost, particularly over northern Britain. I think that's more likely towards the end of the week. We'll see those lighter winds moving in. Plenty of isobars showing up on the weather map for tomorrow as this front heads southwards across the country, and then a family of lows will be heading in from the Atlantic, one hitting us around the middle part of the week, and then another one towards the end of the week. But Friday is quite a long way away meteorologically, so we might not have got the position of that low spot on, but of course we'll keep you posted with our weather bulletins through the week. Now today we've still got some fairly blustery conditions up over Scotland. A fair crop of showers in the northwest, some bright flecks there indicating that some of those showers are quite heavy. And we've also got a weather front straddling England and Wales. Now that's a fairly weak affair. As you can see here, the cloud on it is quite tenuous. If we take a look at the weather radar, not too many echoes showing up over South Wales or indeed across the Midlands into East Anglia. And on that eastern side, I think we're going to find that weather front weakening quite markedly. Still quite a bit of cloud, but not too much in the way of rain. That'll be further across to the west, and that'll start to creep northwards up through the Irish Sea towards Northern Ireland later on this afternoon and into this evening. Top temperatures today in the south around about 10 Celsius, which is 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Now overnight tonight the winds will start to freshen once again, particularly over western areas. Could well be gusts of up to 60 miles an hour in the more exposed places, and it's going to be wet as well in Northern Ireland, in Scotland. A band of cloud and rain moving in there overnight tonight, and eventually moving into northern England and North Wales. So a pretty wet and windy night, but before that arrives, just a chance of the winds falling light and clear skies on the eastern side of Scotland for a touch of frost on the ground there, but that'll soon disappear. On Monday, that weather system tracks southwards, brighter showery weather coming along behind, but fairly heavy blustery showers, lots of them up to the northwest. Could well fall as sleet and snow up over the higher ground. On Tuesday, another Atlantic low will bring cloud, rain, sleet and snow for those northern hills in from the west this time. That in turn clearing away, but then another system hitting us on Wednesday, so the brighter weather giving way to wind and rain. And then towards the end of the week, the winds turn to a more northerly direction, a scattering of showers. Some of them could even turn out to be wintry over southern hills, and then later that last low.
Next Friday is St. Valentine's Day, the great day for courtship. Appropriately sees the start of the first ever National Nest Box Week for Britain's wild birds. It's being organised by the British Trust for Ornithology, and among those backing it is the naturalist and broadcaster Tony Soper.
Yeah, you know, the birds are all singing away like mad at the moment. It's part of their courtship process. But then they have to find somewhere to nest. And a lot of them, especially the ones that come into our gardens, like to nest in a hole in a tree, hole in the wall. And they're not so easy to come by nowadays. So what we want to encourage you to do is put up a nest box.
And does it just stop there?
No, because you've got to record whether it works or not. And, you know, we're building up a big database. So it's really important to know the rise and fall of bird populations. Quite a useful indicator of the health of an environment. It's also good fun.
And that's all from Countryfile today. We're back again next Sunday. Until then, goodbye. The challenge of the chimes. Next week on Countryfile, how to get all of Britain's bells ringing at the same time come the millennium. And why there's a great revival in Yorkshire's rhubarb triangle.